Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury, where we break down the complexities of the tax world, making it easier for you to navigate through the numbers and paperwork. I'm your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about what every business owner needs to know about sales tax. Lance, great to see you.
Great to see you, Kevin. Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, so tell me what you've seen are the most common challenges businesses encounter with sales tax.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about this subject today because a lot of business owners do not know that if they don't send in the sales tax that they collect, that it's a criminal offense. They consider it stealing because the money was never yours. And I'm always surprised when people call me up and they get notices that they owe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, that they don't realize that they can be charged in court, in state court, with a felony that's punishable in the penitentiary because they didn't send in the sales tax to the state.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
That is just, it just boggles my mind all the time that happens.
Wow. What other challenges do you see that business owners encounter?
They have to send it in. It's not theirs. They just don't understand that, it was never their money. And, the other thing is some of them don't collect the sales tax when they're supposed to be collecting it. If you provide a service, you do not have to pay sales tax. But if you have a product, then you have to charge sales tax. And some of those business owners don't even collect it to begin with when they're supposed to. I had a case once in St. Louis County, a criminal case. The guy was charged with 96 felony counts. He was, I guess he was running a scam. He would set up an LLC or whatever, not pay the sales tax, and then shut the LLC down. And he did this to about 12 different businesses.
Wow.
And I think he thought that if he did that, he didn't realize he could be held personally liable for the state sales tax. So just because the business shuts down, they can go after the individual in charge of that business for the unpaid sales tax. So that's the other thing that those people don't understand. So we're in St. Louis court. He's got a $150,000 cash bond. So I told the prosecutor, I know you want your money. It was like $1 million he owed.
Jeez.
And so I said, give him a recognizance bond. We'll pay the $150,000 towards restitution for the unpaid sales tax. So that's what he did. So he never spent a day in jail. So anyway, and I didn't charge this guy enough money. So anyway, I had 93 out of the 96 felony charges dismissed. 2 were reduced to misdemeanors. No time had to be served. 1 felony probation. They wanted 15 to 20 years in the penitentiary before I got in the case. Wow. The judge said, because I'm like an hour and 15 minutes away from the St. Louis County Courthouse, she said, I hate running you up here every month, but what your client did is stealing. I'm going to make him show up in court as much as possible. And so he got probation, and that was only about $500,000. The other half stayed with the Department of Revenue. And even though he got probation, no time in jail, he wasn't happy.
What did he think was going to happen?
I don't know. But, eventually we got out of the state case because he ran out of money. But they even seized his motor vehicle. And they didn't do it because of trying to get any money. There was no equity in the vehicle. They just wanted to get his attention. And so we're out, and they basically said, well, he's not making any money. So every now and then we'll probably levy him, but that's about it. So they're never going to get about $1 million back in unpaid sales tax.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of crazy story. I wonder what he thought. If you're going to pull a scam, you got to do your research.
Yeah. I mean, you would hope so, but he didn't, and he just let it get out of control. And I'm sure he's one of those people, and they were primarily restaurants. He probably didn't know how to run a restaurant. I've always said I'd never run a bar and I'd never run a restaurant because of the hours and people stealing from you. But the other thing with the restaurant business is if you don't know what you're doing, you can lose money pretty easily.
Very quickly.
So,
yes.
Yes. And so I know a lot of people in the restaurant business, but I would never want to run a restaurant or a bar because of the hours, the problems with employees stealing from you. And, it's just a lot of it's hard physical labor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Long hours. Yeah, for sure. So how can businesses make sure that they're in compliance with local, regulations? Like, what do they need to know about their local sales tax rates, and then whatever rules go along with that?
Well, I believe like the city of St. Genevieve, which is where I live in Missouri, the sales tax rate is over 9%, but a lot of that is because of the tourism. So we have a lot of tourism tax to build up the tourism here in town. Mm-hmm. So you need to find out, because it's all based upon where you're situated. There's a state tax rate, but then your local municipalities add on to that. And every county is basically, or every city is basically different in terms of what they charge for their sales tax. So you need to do your research at City Hall as well as at the state level with the Missouri Department of Revenue.
Okay. And what are some key deadlines as far as filing sales tax returns?
Well, it does vary, but primarily it's done on a monthly basis.
Okay.
And I don't know for sure. It varies from state to state as to when it's due for the month that has just passed. But it's going to be due shortly after the end of the month in most states. And so you just need to be able to file on time and have that money set aside so that you can send it in at the right time.
Okay. And what happens if you miss a payment?
Well, eventually it's going to catch up with you. Now, if you just miss one payment, they're probably not going to catch up with you right away. You have to understand that even these state taxing agencies, they're all bureaucracies. Things fall through the crack. I've seen stuff that doesn't rear its head for years. And I mean, which is why sometimes with the IRS, we can run out the clock, because we just had a guy that got out of over $100,000 in tax liability because we were just running out the clock for 2 years and the IRS didn't pick up on it. So, if you miss a sales tax payment one time, they're probably not going to come after you right away. It could be a year. It could be 2 years. It may be 3 or 4 years. I just had a guy at the IRS level, got it resolved. 5 years later, he finally gets a notice from the state and he calls me and says, "What's this all about?" I said, "Well, you just hired me for the IRS." He hadn't received any notices from the state back then. We didn't even know he had a state tax problem. So now he has to deal with that state tax problem as well. So you never really know. There's not a whole lot of rhyme nor reason to when they do things or how they do things, because they're bureaucracies. And, you know what the nature of a bureaucracy is.
Absolutely. What would prompt a sales tax audit on a business?
Well, that's a great question. I have to tell you, in Missouri, because we do a lot of sales tax audits in Missouri, we do a lot of audits, period, in Missouri, basically income. And they go a lot against restaurants and convenience stores because they're convinced that every restaurant and every convenience store is hiding cash. And so they get audited a lot. Now, that's not always sales tax. It can be just income tax as well, but generally they'll couple that with the sales tax as well, because they figure if they're skimming off cash, they're probably cutting corners somewhere else too.
What should a business expect during the audit process?
Well, they should expect that they're going to go through their point of sale information, all their financial information with a fine-tooth comb. What they can also expect is if the taxing authorities find a problem for 1 year, then they're going to expand the scope of the audit to include other years. Now, sometimes you can negotiate with them and say, okay, we'll agree to this as long as you don't expand the scope of the audit. And sometimes that'll work and that'll put an end to it. But those audits could go on for a long time. So, it's a very expensive process. It's a very time-consuming process. It's a lot of work. And I'm going to digress here a little because I'm glad you brought this up. I know we're talking about sales tax, but we now have an audit in the state of Tennessee, but it's an IRS audit. And the auditor is in the attorney's office there every other Friday, all day long. I can't remember the name of it. It's a new audit that was instituted during the Biden administration, and it's a line by line audit of their tax return. And so I think this guy got audited because he took a religious exemption on something, which was sort of a red flag. Yeah. And he's already come in and said that he's expanding the scope of the audit. And so this guy is probably going to pay us $100,000 just for the audit, because when he's in there every other week and there's no end in sight. And I have to tell you, the auditor even hates doing this because it consumes so much of his time as well. And so when he gets finished, if we're not successful, if the exemption fails, he could owe the IRS $1 million.
Wow.
So, yeah, this is really, so you do not want to mess with an audit. You do not want to mess with this yourself. You need professional help. I've seen audits go criminal just because of what the client told the taxing authority.
What strategies can you, the tax attorney, employ to help businesses minimize sales tax liability?
Well, the problem is by the time they come to us, they either have the records or they don't have the records. We can do much more to ensure that they don't run into this problem down the road. But in terms of what has already transpired, some of these businesses, they do not keep very good records. And the other thing that they do, which is a no-no, is some of these people, because the business is struggling, they're pouring their own money into the business, but they don't keep a paper trail of that. And so the auditor is going to assume that that's business income. So the burden's on you to prove otherwise that it's not business income. Mm-hmm. And because of how they keep their records, that's hard to prove sometimes. So you got to keep good records. You got to impress upon these people the importance of good records. And the other thing you need to do is you don't commingle your business bank account with your personal bank account. Exactly. You need to segregate. You need to have your own bank account for your business. And it's hard to believe how many people come to us and do not have a separate bank account for their business. So that's the first thing that we tell them. And all the business income goes into the business. All the business expenses are paid out of the business account. Do not pay your personal expenses out of that account. Right. Do not put any personal income into that account.
Yeah. And just, there's so much software out there. A lot of it's free to keep track of stuff. So yeah, that's good advice. Like, keep records, just make sure that you're, documenting, right? Just have documentation, have a paper trail.
Yeah, you have to have that. That's critical.
I would imagine, do you have a lot of like restaurants and bars and stuff? You mentioned those specifically before. I've known some people who've owned restaurants and bars that kept terrible records. I mean, does that seem to be the same thing that you've experienced?
Yes. And I just had one of my farmer clients. He was forced to shut down one of his restaurants. He, in fact, got charged criminally. We got that resolved. He got probation. But I just saw the other day where his only existing restaurant, he had to shut the doors on that. So he's had the restaurant for a long time. So I don't know if it's because he necessarily didn't know how to run a restaurant. He had a lot of experience. But a lot of these restaurants now, it's hard economic times. The inflation is just killing these restaurants, and people complain about them raising their prices. But what are you going to do? You have to raise your prices to make a profit in this day and age because the cost of food has gone up so high.
Yep. So how can businesses ensure that they're staying current with with sales tax law? What would your advice be to someone who's kind of lost?
Well, I would suggest that when they collect the tax, maybe they put it into a separate account, just the sales tax. That's and then idea. When the time comes for it to be paid, fill out the return. It's not a complicated form. The sales tax is a percentage of what's brought in terms of income, and just segregate it somewhere so the money's there, because you certainly don't want to face criminal charges for not paying the sales tax. The other thing is you need to ensure that if you're selling a product that you are in fact charging sales tax, because if you're not, they're going to come back after you for the unpaid sales tax anyway. So make sure that when you give a product that you're collecting the sales tax on that product.
And how can businesses benefit from consulting with a sales tax attorney such as yourself as soon as they realize there's an issue to be dealt with?
Yeah, they need to call us right away, because eventually the state's going to catch up with you, and you want to do that before it turns criminal. And so you can set up a payment plan. Sometimes we can get it stretched out so it's not that big of a burden on you, and get all that done before they turn it over to criminal investigation, because after that, there's a lot less flexibility in getting it resolved, and they may refer it to the prosecutor in the county in which you live, and criminal charges then will be filed. So you don't want it to get that far. So nip it in the bud.
Yeah, nip it in the bud. And that's a good point. I think a lot of people, I didn't know it could be criminal with sales tax. So, I think a lot of people probably don't know that. That's an important thing for them to remember.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury. If you want to connect with Lance, visit lancedrurylaw.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up on all things tax law. Lance, thanks so much for the insight. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.